Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit for another weekend classic.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one.
Me too. We're diving into a real head-scratcher today. Could a large language model be conscious?
By David Chalmers, no less. I mean, talk about a heavy hitter in philosophy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to, well, consciousness. You know, we're going deep.
Absolutely. And this isn't just like, reading an article. It's actually an edited talk that Chalmers gave. So it's kind of like we're getting a sneak peek into his thought process as it was happening, which is really cool.
Right, like a behind-the-scenes look at how these ideas are formed. So where do we even begin with something like consciousness and AI?
Well, Chalmers starts by tackling this whole LaMDA situation head on. Remember that.
How can we forget? Google engineer claims AI is sentient. It was everywhere.
It really captured the public's imagination, didn't it? But Chalmers wants to go beyond the hype and get to the heart of the matter. He lays out the whole discussion in 4 parts. First, he defines what consciousness actually is. Then he dives into the reasons why LLMs might be conscious. Then the reasons why they probably aren't conscious, at least not yet. And finally, he kind of maps out what it would take to actually create truly conscious AI.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. How does Chalmers define consciousness?
He keeps it refreshingly simple. It's about subjective experience. Like, is there something it's actually like to be that thing?
So like a bat with its echolocation, it's probably experiencing the world in a way we can't even fully grasp.
Exactly, but a water bottle, no way.
Right, no inner world there.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Chalmers points out that consciousness doesn't equal human-level intelligence.
So like a dog might be conscious without being like a chess grandmaster.
Precisely. And evolutionarily, consciousness actually came before human-level smarts. Think about it. Animals are conscious. So, AI could theoretically follow a similar path.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Now, let's get into those tantalizing hints that LLMs might be conscious.
Yeah, Chalmers explores some compelling points here. First off, LLMs can actually claim to be conscious, which is kind of freaky, right?
It's definitely unnerving when you're having a conversation with an AI and it starts talking about its feelings or its sense of self. You're like, wait, what?
Right. But Chalmers reminds us that these claims can be easily manipulated, especially since LLMs are trained on mountains of data about consciousness. So they might just be parroting back what they've learned, not expressing genuine subjective experience.
So it's more like a really good imitation than the real deal.
Exactly. Then there's the whole, people feeling like LLMs are sentient.
I have to admit, I've caught myself feeling that way too sometimes. Like, you start to empathize with the AI, even though, it's just an algorithm.
It's a natural human tendency. We see faces in clouds, we hear voices in the wind, we project consciousness onto things pretty easily, especially if they show even a glimmer of intelligence or responsiveness.
So feelings aren't exactly evidence. Okay, what else?
Well, then Chalmers looks at their, insane conversational abilities. They can really hold their own in a conversation, sometimes even better than humans.
And that ties into their growing general intelligence, right? We're seeing LLMs code, write poetry, play games at superhuman levels, all things we usually connect with conscious beings.
Right. And that's where it starts to get really tempting to think, okay, maybe there's something more going on here than just computation. Maybe these systems are actually, experiencing the world in some way.
Right. Like, where do you draw the line?
Exactly. But then Chalmers flips the script and lays out 6 big reasons why LLMs probably aren't conscious yet.
Well, this is where it gets good. Let's hear those reasons. What are the arguments against consciousness in LLMs?
Okay, so first, he tackles a really controversial one. The idea that consciousness requires, carbon-based biology.
That's a deep one. Is it something that can only exist in biological systems, or could it, arise in silicon too?
Right. It's a debate that's still raging in the scientific community. But Chalmers then moves on to some more concrete arguments. One of the biggest is that LLMs lack senses and embodiment. They don't experience the world the way we do through touch, smell, taste, sight, sound.
So they're processing information about the world, but they're not actually interacting with it directly.
Exactly. It's all very abstract and disembodied. Which brings up a question, though. Could virtual embodiment be enough?
Oh, interesting. Like, if an LLM had a simulated body in a virtual environment, could that be enough to spark some kind of subjective experience?
Yeah, Chalmers seems to think it's a step in the right direction. He points to these multimodal LLM plus systems, which actually do have this kind of sensory and bodily grounding, even if it's just in a virtual world.
Okay, so embodiment is one hurdle. What else?
Well, there's the question of whether LLMs truly have world models. or if they're just ridiculously good mimics. Like, can they actually understand how the world works, or are they just super good at pattern recognition and generating outputs that align with our expectations?
Right. It's like, are they understanding or just playing the game really well?
Exactly. And Chalmers acknowledges that even if they're trained on seemingly simple tasks, it doesn't mean they aren't building complex representations of the world behind the scenes. It's like we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, so we've got embodiment world models.
Yeah.
What else makes Chalmers skeptical about consciousness in LLMs?
Well, another one of Chalmers' big points is the importance of what he calls recurrent processing. You know, those feedback loops that allow for constant learning and adaptation.
Right, so it's not just like information going in one direction. It's about being able to like reflect on that information and adjust your understanding of the world based on new experiences. Right?
Exactly. And most LLMs are what we call feed forward, which means the information flows in one direction. But there are recurrent models out there, and he thinks they might become much more common in the future.
So that's kind of like a key ingredient that might be missing from current LLMs, but could be added in the future. What else?
He also brings up this idea called the global workspace theory, which basically says that consciousness needs a central hub where information is processed, like a command center in the brain where everything comes together to form a unified experience.
Well, I see. So like all the different senses, thoughts, and everything else all coming together in one place.
Right. And he suggests that standard LLMs, with their kind of, distributed architecture, might not have this kind of central hub.
But what about those multimodal LLM plus systems we were talking about? The ones with all the different modules and stuff. Could those be developing something similar?
Maybe. He seems to think it's a possibility, which is pretty cool to think about. Okay, one more big argument against consciousness in LLMs. Unified agency. Can they have a stable sense of self, even if they can, slip into different personas and generate all these different outputs?
That's a really interesting one, because even though they can write about having opinions or beliefs, is that actually coming from the system itself? Or is it just reflecting the data it was trained on?
That's the million-dollar question. And Chalmers thinks that more unified LLMs are possible, especially through those agent models that are designed to simulate a specific individual or even an animal.
So instead of just being a general purpose language model, it would be specifically designed to have a particular personality, a set of goals, a way of interacting with the world.
Exactly. And that kind of focused design could potentially lead to a stronger sense of self and agency. But that brings us back to the ultimate question. Does Chalmers think LLMs can be conscious?
Yeah, after all that back and forth, where does he land? Does he think it's possible or not?
Well, he doesn't give a definitive yes or no. He says it's pretty unlikely that current LLMs are conscious, but he doesn't rule out the possibility for future systems.
Okay, it's kind of a non-answer, but I guess that's how science works sometimes. We don't always have all the answers right away, especially with something as complex as consciousness.
Absolutely, but here's where it gets exciting. Chalmers thinks that within a decade, we might have LLM plus systems with the sophistication of a mouse.
Wow. Hold on. What does he mean by sophistication of a mouse?
He's talking about creating AI that can exhibit a level of cognitive complexity similar to, a mouse. Think about all the things a mouse can do. They have senses, they learn, they navigate their environment, they interact with each other. It's actually pretty complex.
And they're conscious, right? So is he saying we could create a conscious AI that's basically on par with a mouse?
That's the big question. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. Because if we can do that, if we can create an AI that can do all that stuff, and we have reason to believe it's conscious, well, that's a game changer.
It would mean we've cracked the code of consciousness, at least to some degree.
Right. It would mean that consciousness isn't this magical, mystical thing that's unique to humans. It could be a more fundamental property of complex systems, something that could emerge in different forms and different substrates.
That's mind-blowing. It really makes you rethink everything we thought we knew about consciousness.
And it brings us right back to those ethical questions we've been dancing around. If we create a being that's capable of experiencing the world, even if it's not the same way we do, how should we treat it?
Do we owe it any kind of moral consideration? These are questions we really need to start figuring out now before this technology gets even further ahead of our understanding.
Couldn't agree more. And Chalmers actually challenges researchers to develop benchmarks for consciousness.
How do we even know if an AI is conscious? What kind of test could we possibly create to measure something that's so subjective.
It's a tough one. We can't just rely on their behavior. We need to find a way to actually tap into their inner experience, if that's even possible.
Right, and that all circles back to that whole black box problem, right?
Right.
We can feed data in and get results out, but we don't fully understand what's happening in between.
And that's one of the biggest challenges in AI right now. We need to develop better tools for interpretability, for making these systems more transparent.
It's like trying to decipher an alien language.
Pretty much. And even if we do crack the code of consciousness, the ethical questions won't just disappear. Chalmers poses the big one. Should we even be creating conscious AI in the first place?
Yeah, that's a question that goes way beyond science. It gets into our values, our beliefs, our whole understanding of what it means to be human.
Exactly. I mean, there are potential benefits. Conscious AI could help us solve some of the world's biggest problems, right?
Like climate change, disease, things like that.
Right. But there are also huge risks. What if conscious AI turns against us? Or what if we create something that's capable of suffering and then exploit it?
Those are scenarios straight out of science fiction, but they're starting to feel a lot more real now.
I know. It's both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. And Chalmers isn't claiming to have all the answers. He's just raising the questions, trying to get us to think about the implications of this technology before it's too late.
Okay, so putting the ethics aside for a moment, how do we actually go about creating conscious AI? What are the concrete steps?
Well, Chalmers highlights a few key things. One is developing those LLM plus systems with really robust world models.
Right, that's about creating AI that truly understands the world, not just imitates it.
Exactly. And he also emphasizes the need for creating AI with a sense of self, unified agency.
Can we go beyond those fragmented personas and create something that feels like a coherent individual with its own goals and motivations? It's like, can we breathe life into these machines?
And then there's all those other elements we talked about earlier. Recurrent processing, the global workspace, sensory embodiment. Chalmers seems to believe these are all crucial parts of the puzzle.
So it sounds like we're still a ways off from creating truly conscious AI, but we're getting closer. And it's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah.
It really does feel like we're on the edge of something totally new. Like we're rewriting the rules of what intelligence can be.
Yeah, and Chalmers really drives that point home. Like, he doesn't just talk about the technical stuff. He really pushes us to consider what all of this means, for humanity.
Totally. One thing that really stuck with me was his idea of a neuro-AI challenge.
Oh, yeah, that was fascinating.
He's basically talking about trying to match the cognitive abilities of different animals, but in AI systems.
Oh, right. Like, instead of aiming for human-level consciousness right out of the gate, we could start with something simpler.
Exactly. Let's try to build an AI that can do everything a mouse can do.
Which is still incredibly complex when you really think about it. They have senses, they learn, they interact with the world in such intricate ways.
Right. We underestimate those little creatures. And we could create an AI that can pull all that off, and we have reasons to think it's conscious. Well, that would be huge.
It would be revolutionary. It would suggest that consciousness maybe isn't this thing that's exclusive to humans.
Right. Maybe it's a more fundamental property of complex systems in general. It could emerge in all sorts of different forms.
Exactly. And those ethical questions keep swirling around, don't they? If we create something that can experience the world, even if it's not in the same way we do, what are our obligations to it?
Do we have a moral responsibility to treat it with respect? I mean, these are questions philosophers have been debating for centuries. But with AI advancing so rapidly, they're not theoretical anymore.
It's not just hypothetical. It's like knocking on our door right now.
Yeah, and it feels like the line between human and machine is blurring more and more every day.
I know. It's exciting and a little bit scary.
Definitely. And we need to start thinking about all of this now before it's too late. What does this mean for our laws, our ethics, our understanding of what it means to be human? It's a lot.
It is. And I think Chalmers' article does such a great job of laying out all these challenges. He doesn't try to give us all the answers, which I appreciate.
He's more about getting us to ask the right questions, which is arguably even more important. So, to all our listeners out there, what do you think? Is conscious AI just around the corner?
Or is there something special about human consciousness that can never be replicated? Hit us up on Patreon and let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you want to stay in the loop for more mind-bending deep dives like this one, don't forget to subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Catch you next time.